Hello, everyone. My name is Kristia DeGare, and I'm here to present my study entitled Risk Factors, Trauma, and Gang Involvement Among Women in Belize, using trauma-informed narrative interviews. What is trauma? Some of us may have heard this word trauma before, and some of us may not have. Trauma can be defined as a series of events or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotional harmful. This has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning in their physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. Trauma is not the event, but the event experienced by the individual and their reaction to it. There are two types of trauma that are important to my study, which include big T trauma, also known as type 1 trauma. This is significant events, single events that are traumatic and unexpected, such as violent assault, mugging or robbery, death of a loved one, and so on. Type 2 trauma, which is complex trauma, describes trauma which is commonly experienced as a part of childhood, also known as adverse childhood experiences. This trauma is often repeated over time and is often a part of an interpersonal relationship, such as mother, daughter, father, son, and so on. Examples of this type of trauma are physical abuse, abandonment, neglect, domestic violence, and sexual assault, among others. The symptoms of trauma can be as unique as the individual experiencing the trauma. In this visual on the screen, we can see a few of the symptoms, including feeling unreal, chronic pain, anxiety, hypervigilance, and nightmares. Trauma and gang involvement. Research indicates that some trauma symptoms increase the risk for gang involvement. These include behavioral problems, aggression, emotional numbing, loss of sense of self, and depression and hopelessness. While trauma is not the only cause for gang involvement, it can increase a youth's risk for gang joining for a number of reasons. These reasons include gangs can offer a sense of safety, control, and structure, often missing in the lives of youth who've experienced trauma. Youth who've experienced trauma may find some success and belongingness and affirmation through the gang. The gang can also provide a place for youth to reenact learned patterns of behavior, such as violence or aggression, and gangs provide youth with basic needs such as food, shelter, and water, which may be going unmet in their family home. Now, moving on to gangs in general. A definition that I used in this study for what constitutes a gang is organized association of 3 or more people. Some gangs are formal, others less formal, but most share common names, signs, symbols, colors, as well as an area of city or neighborhood. Members individually and collectively engage in or have engaged in criminal activity. Moving on to a little about gangs in Belize. In 2017, the IDB found that over 3/4 of the homicides were classified as gang-related by the police department and the GSU. And we can see that here on the screen. Only 36 murders in 2017 were classified as non-gang related, and 106 were classified as somehow gang related. A little more about gangs in Belize. Right now, there is an estimated 900 to 1,400 active gang members in Belize City alone. A unique factor found in Belize is that gangs are composed of minor factions that are smaller, not well organized, and mimic family groups rather than the large, complex organizations we see in other countries, such as Mexico and in the United States. Going on to an overview of my research study. The research exploring gangs in Belize is growing, except for one area. The research does not include women. This study was the first research study to look at gangs and gang-involved women in Belize. Because the numbers of general gang involvement and activity are increasing, we can hypothesize that the number of gang-involved women is also increasing. And with this, we can hypothesize women in Belize in gangs play an essential role within their gangs. My research included the life histories of the participants from before, during, and while leaving their gang. My research questions included what were the pre-gang experiences of trauma in the participants of the study, and what factors identified by the participants led them to gang joining. There were many other research questions in my study since it spanned the entire life of gang involvement, but within this presentation, we are exclusively focusing on pre-gang experiences of trauma. My study included interviews. I used in-depth life story interviewing with 4 women who engaged in 4 interviews, exploring their experiences from before, during, and after gang involvement. These interviews were conducted using trauma-informed narrative lens. This just means that the participants were in control of how and what they shared. This was so that they could share authentically in a safe environment without judgment. This research project also incorporated creative projects. These creative projects were participant-made expressions of their story. The participants were able to choose whatever they'd like to create for their story in whatever way they would like to create it. This component, like the interviews, was participant-led. The participants chose what form of art they'd like to use, what story they would like to tell, and what medium they'd like to share it in. This research study had 2 creative art projects, and 1 participant decided to create a song for their project. Now, participants in my study, I had 4 participants in my study that included women from the ages of 18 to in their mid-40s who were from 3 distinct fractions of the Bloods. In this study, there was the Gaza Bloods, PIV, and the Manatee Bloods. They were out of the gang from 1 month to over 20 years. Now, on to the findings of my research. The findings mirror the findings of the research studies from the United States and other Central American countries. Participants identified 3 significant push factors for them joining the gang, which included physical abuse, abandonment and neglect, and witnessing domestic violence. Now, these were labeled as 3 of the most significant sources and reasons for joining the gang from the women in my study. The first one, each push factor has a quote in the participant's own words, which I will allow the viewers to read while I speak about this specific push factor. The first push factor was physical abuse. Each participant reflected on experiencing significant amount of physical abuse in their home as young children. Through this quote on the screen, we can see that childhood physical abuse caused this participant to become less attached to her family, which then caused her to seek a replacement family and meeting her needs outside of the home. This push factor was identified in the interviews of all 4 participants. They all described physical abuse as being one of the leading factors that led them to seek acceptance and love elsewhere, leading them to the gang. The second factor was abandonment and neglect. Abandonment and neglect was found in the life stories of each participant. They all identified abandonment and neglect as a significant traumatic experience that became a push factor in seeking out and joining the gang. Each woman described feeling like they no longer belonged at home, feeling unloved, or like a burden on their family as a result of abandonment and neglect by their parents, which caused them to seek ways to meet their needs outside of the home. This is reflected in the quote on the screen from one of our participants. The final and third push factor identified as significant by the participants of this study was witnessing domestic violence. Again, all of the participants expressed that witnessing domestic violence was a common experience in their household that caused them to feel further disconnected and separated from their families. This quote from one participant skillfully reflects the effects that witnessing domestic violence had on her as a child. In this quote, she reflected on the aftermath of this violent incident, how she decided that the stress and anger associated with seeing this violence was too much for her to handle, driving her to seek ways to escape her home life. And eventually, this participant left her home permanently at the age of 10 to join the gang. These experiences and feelings associated with them created the need for the children to attempt to meet their needs, such as safety, acceptance, and love through other avenues, which included the gang. Moving on to the creative projects, that were produced by the study and by the participants. Research has shown that nonverbal expressions such as art can help individuals further talk about their trauma experiences, especially in populations that experience significant stigma. And we all know that gang-involved individuals, especially women, experience stigma. On this slide, we can see one of the pieces of art that show the participant's story visually. This participant described drawing or painting the moment in her life where she decided that she needed to leave the gang. She's depicted in the middle with her hands up, asking herself, which road should she take? The road that led to out of the gang was labeled love, peace, self-esteem, and future. The road that showed her remaining in the gang was labeled hate, shame, destruction, and low self-esteem. The participant with her arms up describes asking herself this: which one should she take? She also decided to include a Bible verse that helped her, as she described, eventually leave the gang. The next participant decided to depict her experiences of pre-gang trauma in a song. She created her song lyrics. She expressed the feelings that led her to the gang. Highlighted in the song's lyrics are feelings of loneliness, being unloved, and uncared for. Now I'll let the viewers scan through the lyrics for one moment. The song really highlights these feelings of being uncared for that led her to the gang. The final project shown in this presentation today is a visual timeline of one participant's experience deciding to go to the gang, her experiences in the gang, and finally on the last panel, her turning around, leaving the gang, which, as you can see on the screen, led her to love, smiling, and happiness. So I wanted to include a quote from one of the participants about the meaningful process that she experienced while creating her art. In this quote, this participant reflected on her creative project and experiences making the artwork. She reflected that it helped her visualize everything that she's been through and appreciate and acknowledge the achievements she's made to get to where she is today, which was an active community member who is happy and healthy. So viewers may be thinking, I don't know any youth who is at risk of joining a gang, or I don't know anyone in a gang. So why does this matter to me? Childhood trauma has significant negative effects on adult functioning. Many of these issues we are still searching for answers today, such as cancer, diabetes, and heart attacks. Childhood trauma can cause an increased risk of HIV and STDs in adulthood, alcohol and substance use, and issues with obtaining and keeping employment later on in life. As you can see, childhood trauma has many significant and long-lasting effects. If we know that childhood trauma causes many of these issues later on in life, this will give us a better grasp on how to try to prevent and heal these things. Another reason why this matters is research from the United States and other Central American countries indicate that intervention and prevention programs for gang-involved men do not work as successfully in gang-involved women, which indicates the need to create programs specifically for gang-involved women. So, for future research directions, comprehensive first-hand information is an essential step in strengthening the country's knowledge of gangs. This knowledge will help then develop specific implementation, prevention, and intervention programs for gang-involved girls and women, and girls who are at risk for gang involvement. This research was a pilot study, which will then become a larger scale study in the future. I wanted to add this slide just in case any of the viewers may know a youth who may be at risk or who is currently gang involved. Get help, reach out, there is support. The information below all has resources for individuals who may need help with a youth who is at risk or gang involved. Viewers can email me at this email address at any time with any comments, questions, or feedback. Thank you to everyone who viewed my presentation today, and I look forward to answering your questions after this presentation or through email. Thank you.